Good evening. Today is June the 21st, 2023, and I'm going to talk about the 1931 Canadian Census, which was released to the public on June the 1st by Library and Archives Canada. Now, currently there is no surname index to the census, but that is being worked on by Library and Archives Canada in conjunction with Family Search and Ancestry. But if you know the district and sub-district of an area that you're interested in, you can browse the items one by one, and considering there's only about 2,000 people living in Ocean Falls at that time, it's not that onerous a job to scroll through the whole town and find anybody that you think might be living there. So I will start off by showing you how to do that. So if you key in 1931 Census Index into your favorite search engine, you should come up with a page like this, and you want to find this item, which will lead you to a Library and Archives Canada site. And then scroll down, and then you can put in the province, the district, and Ocean Falls is in Skeena District, and the sub-district. And the sub-district, there's a lot of them, and you have to scroll down. So there are Ocean Falls items on this unorganized territory 47 down to and including 50. So I'll just take a look at see what that is, and you browse, and then you come to a page like this. If you scroll down a little bit, so this particular sub-district only has 2 pages. And what you can do, you can download these pages. This first page is always a descriptor. And you can see we have in here Walker Lake, Roscoe Inlet, Sisters Inlet, Gunboat Passage, Ocean Falls, Kimsquit, and Bainbridge. I think that's Bainbridge Cove. But you could key on one of these, and then you can download. And you can download one file, or you can download all images, but you do have to tick this box first to say that you realize this is copyright and you will only use this for research and private study. And that's basically all there is to it. I personally downloaded all the items for Ocean Falls. But now there's a few kind of administrative type things you should know about the 1931 census. It was taken on June the 1st, or more precisely, on that exact moment that May the 31st becomes June the 1st. That is to say at midnight, which means that if a child was born at, say, 5 to 12, that is 11:55 p.m., on May 31st, they would be included in the census, but if they were born at 12:05 a.m. on June the 1st, they would be excluded. And similarly, if somebody died at 11:55 p.m. on May 31st, they would be excluded because they are not alive when May the 31st becomes June the 1st, but if they happen to die 5 minutes after midnight, they would be included. So that there's a very precise cutoff date as to who gets included and who does not. And I don't think any of that came up in Ocean Falls. And one other item that you that should be aware of, the enumerators are supposed to record people in their normal place of abode, or the normal place of living. That is to say, if someone from Ocean Falls is visiting Vancouver, they are supposed to be recorded in Ocean Falls. And what would happen then is the enumerator in Vancouver would probably record them, and then after the fact, that would be added into the Ocean Falls item. And it could also be that if it is, as it did happen in this case, a mother and daughter were in Vancouver, but when the enumerator came around to the household, the husband, who was the head of house, he gave the enumerator all of the people that should have been in the house. So that person, or those 2 people, the mother and daughter, were actually recorded twice, actually 3 times, because they were recorded in Vancouver. Then that copy was sent to the Ocean Falls district, and the husband had already recorded in the Ocean Falls district. Now I happened to notice that duplicate, so I removed that, and there was another one as also that was duplicated in that manner. Now you can tell these transfers in and out when you're looking at the census, because you'll see it off in the left margin. There'll be, say, a handwritten note that says transferred from, which means it came from another enumeration district and was transferred into, in this case, enumeration district 234, which includes Ocean Falls, or that's the Skeena district. And if it says transferred to, that means they are not normally resident in Ocean Falls, and they were transferred to another enumeration district. And I saw one of those when I was going through the Ocean Falls census. Now, get on to the statistics. I'm sure that's what you want to know all about. How many people were living there in Ocean Falls? And according to my count, after I made several adjustments for duplicates, 1,920 individuals is what I found. I thought that was a bit low. I thought there would have been closer to 2,000. And maybe this is because 1931, that's the beginning of the Depression. Maybe the mill had cut back on the number of employees, and there weren't nearly as many people in town. In this count, I found that there were 934 adult males, that's 49% of the population, and only 23% of the population were adult females. So the adult males outnumber the females by more than 2 to 1. And there were 545 children, and I included 17 and under as children in my counting. That represents 28% of the population, so there were more children than there were adult females. Now this is not a surprise. These stats are not a surprise. This is a mill town after all. We expect there to be more males than females. And of course there's going to be numerous children from the people that are married there. Now let's look at racial origin. That's another one of the questions they ask on the census. What is your racial origin? And by racial origin, they don't mean place of birth, and they do not mean your citizenship. What they're looking for is basically where did your ancestors come from, basically, and if there's a divergence between male and female ancestors, you take the paternal line for there. So, keeping that in mind, of course, as you would expect, the English racial origin is the most prevalent at 34%, and people from Ocean Falls will not be surprised to find out that the next most common racial origin is the Japanese at 23%. And I had a look through to see what kind of jobs were the Japanese doing. And it turns out they were well spread out throughout the mill, except for the paper mill. I didn't see any of the Japanese people who had papermaker as their job. But here are some of the jobs that they did do. Block feeder in the chipper mill, grinderman, screen tender, sawyer, barber, shoemaker, pulp baler, yard laborer, beaterman, acid maker, millwright, and millwright's helper. But none on the paper machines. So going back to our list of where these people are from, 23% from Japanese origin, 17% Scotch, Irish only 7%, Chinese, there's only 57 people there, 3%, pretty insignificant, but I thought I'd mention them because they live in two different places in town. Now some of them live in bunkhouse number 1 on Marine Drive, and most of the people that live there, their job is mill worker in the sawmill. And then there's another group of about 10 or 12. They live in the hotel annex. That is, of course, we're thinking the old hotel annex here. And all of those people, of course, they work in the hotel. And most of them, their job is flunky. That's the job, that's the description that's on the census. So I imagine those are people that will do whatever odd job is needed during the day. So they may be cleaning floors one day, washing dishes another day, whatever the foreman thinks is necessary for that day. They didn't seem to have a specific job such as cook. And it wasn't only that bunkhouse, which when I was around, when I came to town, that bunkhouse was known as the Chinese bunkhouse. But in 1931, there were other people in there. Like the head chef was in there, and he was European. Like I said, there was only what 10 or 12 Chinese people were living in that place. Then there were maybe as many others, non-Chinese, in there. Okay, after the Chinese, East Indian, and then there's only 10 of them, but I thought it was kind of interesting to mention them because they're all named Singh. They all live in bunkhouse number 2 on Marine Drive. They all work in the sawmill. There's no East Indian women, no East Indian children, but half of them are married. And I should note that with the Chinese people too, even though there's 57 people, there's no Chinese women in town, at least none were enumerated, and no Chinese children. And some of the Chinese men were married, so presumably they had a wife in Vancouver or perhaps in China. The next and last statistic that I want to talk about is religion. And the United Church is the biggest religion, 38% of the population. Now that includes the United Church in town and the Japanese Church, which was a United Church. So 30% of the total population go to the church in town, and there's 8% of the 8% of the total population go to the Japanese Church. Now the different churches aren't mentioned. I just assumed that all of the Japanese people who put down United Church as religion went to the church in what we call the Oriental Quarters, and the people who were not Japanese, I assume they all went to the church in town beside the Catholic Church. Anglican is the next biggest group at 22%. Buddhists, 14.5%, and we know what they are, at least it's not difficult to guess. All of those Chinese, all of the Buddhists are Japanese, but as we just mentioned, some of the Japanese go to the United Church. Roman Catholic, only 9% of the population put down Roman Catholic as their religion. And I was surprised. I thought there might be more, but not. Lutheran, just 86 people. That's 4% of the population, and that's mostly the Norwegians and Swedes that are living in town. And then, of course, there's a bunch of others that, for what they put down under that column called religion. And those others are, or at least some of them are, Presbyterian, Protestant, Quaker, Seventh-day Adventist, Congregational, Sikh, Agnostic, Nun, Baptist, Confucius. The Confucius one, they're all Chinese. That is to say, if any of the Chinese had a religion, they put down Confucius. So those are the only statistics, but I wanted to mention where people lived in town. Of course, most of the people lived in houses and the bunkhouses as well, and apartments. But I did mention there's this place called 3rd Street Dormitory, and after some contemplation, that is the Kitimat Lodge, or what I would call the Teacher's Lodge, which is across the street from the hospital. And the only reason I mention it, well, there's only 12 people in there, which surprised me. I thought there was more people living in that building. But one of the people living in there was a 37-year-old teacher named Elizabeth Long. And I mention her because when I entered grade 1, 25 years later, Miss Long was still teaching in the elementary school. She was teaching grade 5, and by the time I got to grade 5, she had retired. But really, she did have a long tenure at the Ocean Falls and later Charleston Elementary School. Now, I don't know, some of these others, they're a little puzzling. So there are 6 people were enumerated at the fire hall. I don't know if they were living there, if there's place for 6 people to live there, whether there was some kind of attachment to the fire hall, or whether they just happened to be working there the night of the enumeration. You're supposed to be enumerated at your place of living, not your place of work, but it listed 6 people there. Courthouse, and for courthouse, read Mabel's apartment. 3 people living there, that's the constable, his wife and child. The hospital, there's 6 people enumerated there. 1 matron, 3 nurses, 1 orderly, and 1 patient. James Larson was in the hospital. The Japanese church, 8 people lived there, which is not a surprise. It was the Reverend Kabayama, if I got his name pronounced right. His wife and 6 children lived there. Now here's a pop quiz for you. How many people do you think were enumerated on 10th Street? Answer, none. The 10th Street was not invented then. And why? Because it was all called Falls Avenue. So on the 1931 census, Falls Avenue starts at the bottom of the dam hill, up the hill and around the corner to house 1084, which we would say, or at least people from my era would say, okay, now you're on 10th Street, but not so. All of that from 1084 all the way down to house 1020 was all Falls Avenue. The houses beyond 1020, I guess that would be to the west, which were developed later. They're not on here because they hadn't, that part of 10th Street hadn't been built, as we saw when I looked at the 1928 map in my previous video. Now, house number 30, that's the company house. That, of course, was not shown because nobody lives there. That was purely for the senior management from Vancouver or San Francisco to live there. There's no permanent residence there, so it is not mentioned. House 34, though, which is the house beside the company house, that was enumerated, and it's on Nevins Avenue. So that little street that went up to the company house, which I would know as Fur Street because I lived on it, it was known, it was an extension of Nevins Avenue in 1931. So here's another pop quiz for you. What is the address of the hotel? Well, in 1931, the hotel address was 50 First Street. And I mention that because there's another residence called 41 First Street. Now, 41 First Street, by everything that's logical, should be in the same block as 51st Street, that is the same block as the hotel, but on the other side of the street. So where is 41 First Street? Was it actually the building that we know, or that was known then as the Post Office and Customs Office? I don't know if anybody lived there. You would think it would be the postmaster living there, but there was 2 people living at 41 First Street. It was a 61-year-old widow and her daughter, a 24-year-old lady who worked as a clerk in the paper mill. Now, I wondered whether that 41 First Street was a misnomer and it should have been 41 Nevins Avenue, because I have a little problem with those number 40 and 42, because I know later on number 40 became 39 and 40, and number 42 became 41, 42, and 43. So I wonder if that 41 First Street should really be 41 Nevins Avenue. Now there's 6 other dwellings that I don't know anything about, and they are numbered from 148 to 159 on First Street. And I think maybe this is the foreman's quarters. If it is, then the foreman's quarters, which we saw, or I saw on the 1928 map, the foreman would have been moved out to somewhere else, a duplex or a house in town, because the people in here were definitely not foremen. They were hairdresser, carpenter, pile driver, clerk in the general store, homemaker, pool marker in the hotel, watchman, and a helper in the mill. Now, that pool marker in the hotel kind of got me a bit curious. Are you trying to tell me that this fellow who put his annual wage down, I think he put down $1,100 or $1,200, he made that much money by marking scores in the pool room? Now, maybe he was also the proprietor or the manager of the pool room, or maybe he was actually working somewhere else, and his little joke was to say that he was actually a pool marker, marking the scores. Anyhow, that's a little oddity there. At least I thought it was odd. And there were 5 people who were listed their abode as boat. And what was missing out of this census was bunkhouses 3 to 7 in town. So bunkhouse 1 and bunkhouse 2, they show up on First Avenue with, I think, 40 odd people in combined on those. But bunkhouse 3 to 7 going up, and it would have been C Street there. It's a street that we know as Bennett Street, but it was C Street in 1928, and I assume C Street in 1931. So I wonder, where is that? Maybe that might be why, maybe that was just missed, or again, maybe it's the same reason that I'm overestimating the number of people, thinking there should be closer to 2,000, that the workforce had been reduced and Pacific Mills decided to close those one or use them for non-residential purposes, because I know, what didn't we see that bunkhouse 7 was used as a reading room or part of bunkhouse 7, and so maybe the others are similarly being reused. And I just want to make one further comment. Now, this is not to do with Ocean Falls per se. These people, there's a group of people living on Cousins Inlet, and in particular there's about, I don't know, a total of maybe 10, less than 10 people I would say, but one particular house has 5 ladies living in it. And one lady is the cook. She's an Oriental lady. There's 3 people, 3 women that are, who they give their occupation as income. And normally on the census, when they say income, that means they're living off their investments. And one lady, who is the head of house, she was a lodging house keeper. Really? Who knew? A lodging house on Cousins Inlet. Well, I'm going to say every sailor within 20 miles knew of a lodging house on Cousins Inlet, and I'm going to suggest that some of them left that establishment at the rising sun, if you get my drift, and maybe at night they had a red light out on their porch so that the sailors could find their way to that house when it was dark. I don't know, I'm just guessing that that's what that is. And with that thought, I will leave you and bid you a fond farewell and instruct you to stay awesome.